as this Heart Sutra begins with Avalokiteshvara, doing deep prajna paramita. So Avalokiteshvara is this bodhisattva sitting down and doing this deep prajna paramita, deep looking, right? Looking very, very deeply, very almost like putting oneself under a microscope, not to analyze necessarily, but to see really clearly. And that's not an easy distinction for most of us to make, because we're so used to whatever we see, we're instantly analyzing it and judging it and comparing it to other things that we've known in our lives or through our memory. But that's not what the Heart Sutra is suggesting. It's suggesting we just look deeply. And when we look deeply into what we call ourselves, as I said, if we don't get lost too fast in our own conditioned thoughts, we start to see quite quickly that it's almost like at the beginning, you can feel like you are like this strange living paradox, whereas you feel very much like I am here, right? Like you can feel that right now, the feeling of I am here, I exist, sitting wherever you're sitting, paying attention, all of that, whatever your feeling of, as the Indian great non-dual teacher Nisargadatta used to say, it's your sense of I am, whatever your sense of I amness, your sense of existing, right? Your sense of yourself. That's clear enough. But then when you get more precise and you say, well, there's a feeling, there's a sense that there's a separate me here somewhere. There's no denying that, at least in a certain part of our evolution, it very much feels like there's a separate somebody there. So we're not arguing with your feeling. We're looking deeply into that. And so even though there's a feeling of self, that when we really look at it, it's funny how you can't ever quite grasp it, right? The only thing you can do is grasp thoughts that seem to appear to refer to yourself, or images that seem to or appear to support our idea of ourself, or memories that because we can remember them now, something that happened a long time ago, there seems to be something continuous through time, and that can give us a sense of self. But when we look very closely at it, it's like that feeling, if you've done deep inquiry, who am I? Like, I feel like I'm here, but I can't really grasp me, right? Thoughts, yes. Memories, yes. Feelings, yes. Experiences, yes. Sensations, all these are present. But the supposed separate self that all those are supposedly happening to, it's odd that it seems like it's so much here until you get very precise and try to get at what it actually is. Again, what it is in your actual experience, right? Because right at that point, one could very easily start thinking philosophically or psychologically, and which means you're going off into an abstraction, which may be useful at other times. But in terms of what the Heart Sutra is trying to get at, in terms of our realization, to be always going off into abstractions and interpretations actually takes us farther and farther and farther away from realization, from the experience of our true nature. So it is paradoxical that feeling, I know I'm here somewhere, and yet I can't really get a hold of the essence of me, right? What we're really feeling then is our own self-consciousness. At its root level, that self-consciousness where one is supposedly aware of themselves, but what's really happening is it's just the operation of self-consciousness. This way that our consciousness can is always doing this U-turn, and this is sort of metaphorical, symbolic way of speaking. But if you imagine your consciousness, you say you're looking out through your eyes, you're hearing through your ears, or you're feeling through your feelings, and it's as if things are going. You are here and you're looking at what's out here and hearing what's out here, right? But if we kind of reverse that tendency, well, before we do that, because we're, say, looking through our eyes and hearing through our ears, it's like consciousness is going out. But the self-consciousness is when the consciousness is going out to what you see, what you hear, or something like that. And it's doing this U-turn and referring back to whatever thoughts you have about yourself, what that sparks in your own intellect, in your thinking, in your memory, all of that. So once that turning, that arc of consciousness turning back on itself is actually the most fundamental aspect of self-consciousness. Self-consciousness, you could say, begins when that arc, that turning of consciousness back happens. And of course, when it turns back, whatever's in your mind at that time, that's what it tends to identify with. If or your body, if you feel happy, you'll say, "Hey, I feel happy." If you're sad, I'll feel sad. If you're, whatever you find when that self-consciousness, that arc of consciousness is turning back upon itself. And that's how we define ourselves too. So when the arc of self-consciousness turns back, whatever idea, whatever set of memories, whatever conditioned tendencies are there that we've associated with ourself, that's what we're looking at. And it's that whole conglomeration of identified elements that gets that sense of like hyper self-consciousness, when all of a sudden everybody turns and looks at you and you all of a sudden feel hyper self-conscious. Or for a lot of people, say if they were going to stand up on a stage or give a speech or a talk or give a toast or something like that, all of a sudden you feel this sort of self-consciousness, right? You're experiencing that arc of consciousness turning back. And then it's going to encounter whatever your self-concept is. The Heart Sutra is basically saying, look at that really closely. At least start there. And the more you look for the actual you, not just memories about you, thoughts about you, your beliefs, your personality, your predispositions, all of that. Those are all there. We're not going to argue with the presence of any of those aspects of our experience. But the supposed entity that owns all those is never really quite found. That's the frustrating part of self-inquiry, right? Who am I? Who am I isn't asking, who do you think you are? Who were you taught that you were? Who does your culture say you are? Self-inquiry is trying to go right through that, because that's like a mirage in a certain sense. Self-inquiry is trying to penetrate that and go, no. That's what you've learned. That's what you've been told. That's what you've been taught. That comes from your culture, your society, your parents, your friends. And then at a certain point, then you started doing it to yourself. You so internalized that message-making mechanism, that fabricates judgments and thoughts, and then you own them as yourself, right? There's a certain point where we're just inheriting all this from the world around us, and then there's a point when we start doing it to ourselves because it's just been internalized, right? When we look at it, though, deeply, as I say, so through some kind of self-inquiry, the frustration initially with self-inquiry is that you feel like I can't quite get a handle on me. I can't quite find myself, right? You could talk, as I've said, about memories that have happened and beliefs you have and, all the normal definers. But those are all secondary. Those are secondary, supposedly, to an even more primary self. So the frustration of self-inquiry is you're asking, who am I? But the deeper you go with it, the less and less and less and less and less you find. You just start to find, well, I assumed I was this. I assumed I was that. Maybe I even believe I am some image, some idea, worthy, unworthy, good, bad, whatever it might be. But these are secondary judgments. These aren't who you are. And when we start inquiry, we expect that I will find sort of the ultimate me, hopefully a very spiritual version of me. But as it says, when you do this looking within, you might just find emptiness after emptiness after emptiness, which means nothing separate to grasp. And when we've exhausted the attempt to grasp ourselves as something separate or apart from everything else, when that starts to exhaust itself, then maybe we get a glimpse that the reason we couldn't find ourselves as something specific, something separate in there, right, as some sort of internalized entity, wasn't because we failed at the inquiry or we weren't good at it. It was actually because we failed to find that self that's apart from or separate from everything else, because it doesn't exist. The reason we can't grasp it is because it's not actually there. Now, to most of you, especially if you've heard me talk before or other teachings like this, it's not a new idea that the separate self doesn't really exist. But we can only know this when we really dive in there and look for ourselves. We don't believe the Heart Sutra just because it says it, or me just because I suggest it. I'm suggesting that we actually do the practice, do the in-looking, which is that's what the inquiry is. So that's one of the meanings of emptiness, right? The emptiness of anything separate. In a very similar way, like I said, even though